for sure.
Yes, he did. Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Welcome back. It's great to have you on this edition of Donnybrook. Lots to talk about, a lot of hot topics on this cold day. Let's meet the panelists who join us for this edition, starting with Sarah Fenske from St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, sitting in for Wendy Weiss, who's taking the week off. Mr. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, one of our founders. From St. Louis in the Know on KTRS, he's Ray Hartmann. He's also with rawstory.com, as well as the Riverfront Times. And from the St. Louis American, Alvin Reid. A lot of St. Louis on this edition. Bill, we're going to start with you. It was a week ago. Tragically, we lost a firefighter in the line of duty. We're talking about Ben Polson, whose funeral was today. He was in a house on Cote Brilliant in the Wells Goodfellow neighborhood that had been condemned and considered inhabitable years and years ago. People said it should have been demolished. Well, it was demolished, this house, the day after firefighter Polson's tragic death. Some people say there are 10,000 vacant properties in the city of St. Louis, and it should be one of the top priorities now to demolish these properties. After all, Detroit has demolished 20,000 properties since 2014. St. Louis demolishes at most maybe 500, something like that. Do we really need to get on the ball and start tearing down some of these buildings that are dangerous?
Oh, I think we do. I mean, this has been a battle ever since I got here. The preservationists who argue that tearing down buildings wholesale, the city loses its soul, versus the people who live in the neighborhoods who say, this building is ready to fall down. And the buildings seem to reach a point where it's prohibitively expensive for somebody to try to renovate it. I mean, it's much cheaper to just tear it down. And I think that in the neighborhoods where we have a lot of these buildings, we should be knocking bunches of them down.
So I got to argue with this. You guys know I live in the Lafayette Square neighborhood of St. Louis. And if people had taken the same attitude back in the 60s, where would that neighborhood be today? You know, it's all these wonderful homes from the 1880s. People invested in them. They brought that neighborhood back. Right now, there are major efforts underway to try to tackle the city's vacancy problem. They have a little bit of funding. They could use a lot more funding. And while I would certainly never want a house that is completely beyond the bounds and somebody to perish in it, I feel like they're taking strides to try to deal with this backlog of vacancies they have. I say we got to give them more time to do that.
Well, I hope so, Sarah, but like I say, it's been going on for so long, and some of the buildings, they have an entire wall gone. I mean, an outside wall. And people in construction tell me you just can't spend enough money to try to prop it up.
Yeah, I certainly agree that the ones that can't even be propped up, those need to come down. I think the situation in Cote Brilliant, this was one where they were worried that possibly some homeless people were living there. There had been some bars on the windows or something that suggested that. It may not have been one of the worst ones. So even if you targeted the worst ones, you're not necessarily going to get the house where this kind of tragedy might happen.
I think it's dangerous to generalize, too, because when you do, I saw it downtown, particularly with commercial buildings, they always argue that, oh, it's too expensive to renovate it, and most of the time it isn't. Now, I'm not saying in this case, but, you know, the preservationists play an important role because left to the natural tendencies, the developers are people who want to build new. And we lost, right now, the Gateway Mall, which is the ultimate white elephant, and always will be. We lost the title guarantee, the Buda, and the International buildings, three great active buildings in the 1980s on the historic register of historic places. So you got to be careful. That said, I think the city really, you may know more than I do about what they're doing, but it seems like forever the city has been by far the largest owner of vacant properties. And as Bill says, you can't assume just because they're old and historic that they are viable. And it doesn't, I don't see, maybe they can fix it, but I don't get a sense that the city has done a very good job of keeping up with it.
I think the city is given a chance
for people to literally put their money where their mouths are, okay? To renovate these buildings is expensive and talk is cheap. And it's time for the city to say, like, you know what? I'm hearing this. You've got good, thoughts, but I'm not seeing the private sector, the individual.
But
it's funny you say that, because later today, next up, we're going to talk to Jerry Schlichter, the downtown attorney who wrote the historic tax credit legislation for the state of Missouri. Maybe he'll have an answer. But I tend to agree with Sarah to the extent that we have already torn down so much of our heritage. Chuck Berry's boyhood homes, and where Irma Rombauer wrote The Joy of Cooking, and where General William Tecumseh Sherman lived. They're all torn down. 5135 Kensington, the building that inspired Meet Me in St. Louis, torn down. I mean, and how about 80 mounds on the side of the river from the Mississippians, torn down. And yet, as St. Louisans, we go to the airport, we go to Venice and Philadelphia to look at the beautiful old architecture, which is a lot older than the architecture that we have.
Well, yes, but, all right, one thing, let's be honest here. Where are these buildings at, okay? They're north side, all right? And now you're waiting to transform an entire part of the city, okay? And that has to happen before people want to maybe do something with these buildings.
But
the priority should be getting it together.
Right.
And if some houses have to be sacrificed, even if historic, in some way, shape, or form, it just has to happen.
And some are being sacrificed. They have taken down some of these houses. Lyda Cruson had a number of these that were demolished. But piece by piece, there are people, young people in North St. Louis, private citizens have stepped up. And now we have this Prop NS that was passed, oh boy, I think about 4 years ago. Small pool of money to help people. There's a Mow to Own program. There's a couple other programs where you can take charge of the one in your neighborhood, or get your hands on these things pretty cheaply and get started. And people are doing it piece by piece, house by house.
All right, Alvin, we're going to go back to you. Speaking of tearing things down, last week we talked to Rhonda Hamnabrugge, the airport director, on Next Up, and Bill and I heard her talk about the new proposal for Lambert. Get rid of the east terminal where Southwest is, combine all those gates with the western or the Terminal 1, so there'll be 62 gates right there and some new parking. And it's a proposal that would kind of reconfigure the airport. Do you think it goes far enough?
No, and a letter writer with the Post-Dispatch shared their thoughts, which I agree with. Let's start over. I mean, I thought we got a free kind of start because we would have got some insurance money and who knows what else when the tornado slammed into it. And I'm not being facetious. I think that was the chance. Now, this is another chance. You got money coming in. Let's redo our airport. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Other cities do that.
You want to tear everything down this thing. What do you do? You tear down the arch, too.
But, I mean, the airport? I mean, our airport is just not, like, functional is okay. And that's where St. Louis is functional. It's okay. Let's step up the game and start with the airport.
We can't look. The airport the airport is disappointing to people because it is a shell of what it was when we were a hub. Because our traffic and the revenues are, but they're not down because of any deficiency in the airport. It's because we lost our hub. And we've got other economic issues. We've lost so many big corporate headquarters, which are a big factor in this. And no, the football team is not one of them that affects it. But seriously, the airport disappoints people. But if you take away the fact that those of us who can remember when it was much more bustling feel like it's sometimes a ghost town, the fact is and Rhonda, I think, has done a terrific job over the last decade. It is it is functional. It is a decently run, efficient airport. There's nothing wrong with the airport. The problem is we need more traffic.
I like Alvin's attitude. Let's just spend some money. I mean, we got a bunch of money, and we got an old airport.
We got the money.
I mean, but Alvin said the airport is functional. Let's face it, there's few things in St. Louis that are functional. Why would we tear down one of the ones that is?
Well, because that's our front door, okay? That's our porch, our front door. And this is what this is what we present to people who have never been to St. Louis. And their first impression, okay, is that, like, man, This is nice flying. It's like 1955. Like Eisenhower gonna walk through here at any moment.
Well, I will say, if nothing else, for the visitors, we should pick up the litter on Highway 70 and
Oh, the whole drive is bad, but it
that's a
starts
problem.
with the airport.
I want to ask you, Sarah Fenske, about you anchored KWMU's coverage of the State of the State address by Governor Mike Parson yesterday. What are the thoughts that you bring to this broadcast?
Well, so I didn't bring many thoughts to this broadcast. However, I got to interview Jo Mannies, who's a veteran political reporter in town, and she had a lot of interesting insights. I also got to listen to Mike Parson's whole speech. He presented a lot of programs that it is hard to argue with, and these are programs largely being paid for with federal dollars. You know, $400 million for broadband. Who's not happy about that? This is all kind of nice bipartisan stuff. What Jo pointed out, and I just have to steal her point here, he didn't say a word about one of the biggest changes to Missouri's budget and what's happening in the state, which is Medicaid is expanding. Didn't talk about it like this is a good thing. Didn't talk about it like let's have a last-ditch effort to try to stop this. Just didn't even mention it. He kind of stuck to the things that he knew people could agree with.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm sorry I missed it, but I sure would suggest that you learn a lot more listening to Jo Mannies' commentary about his Mike Parson speech than any speech Mike Parson might give. I mean, to put it in terms he might relate to, you talk about all hat, no cattle. And so that's probably, I'm curious, did he, I saw a headline that Mike Parson is still against mask mandates or something.
You know,
but did he have, does Mike Parson have any positive suggestion about what government might do about...
You're not even fair to the guy. Now, I agree with you.
No, what is he going to do about COVID?
The fella...
Did he include that in a state speech?
I am not a fan of many of the plans and actions of the governor, but he's going to put $500 million into higher education. He's going to put $3.6 billion into K through 12. He's going to expand broadband access.
Well,
he's got money for hospitals. I mean...
Well, they came into all this money. Good for him.
That's true.
But he's also going to still want to cut some taxes, isn't he, I'll bet?
Well, he's going
to
cut taxes.
Which are already below... Well, but I mean, what do you know, understand something great.
Well, you recently said that you thought that either the NFL settlement or the federal money coming to St. Louis should be divided up and given to everybody. So this is kind of a tax cut.
I like that. I think we could do that. But what I'm
trying
saying
to say
about Parson is
everything he said. There's a lot of things you would have agreed with.
I'm not saying I disagree with everything he said. Oh. I'm saying I would always listen to Jo Mannies over Mike Parson just because by reputation, but also
the big
because and look, I understand. I'm sure he stayed away from Medicaid because the right wing of his party.
They'd like to rise up.
Well, right now I did a column on it. Yeah. Cody Smith wants to go after it again. They want to put another red meat.
I think the headline is that this state has a $7 billion surplus. But when was the last time and we haven't even mentioned that yet. Well, when was the last time that happened?
Here, take the money. I mean, you know, I had like every now and then I'd had a $750 surplus when they sent my, stimulus check. All right, I don't even count that. Right. But I mean, what is the biggest problem that Missouri has going on right now?
Probably bulldozers, if you're asking.
No, it's COVID.
It's COVID.
It's COVID. And to not mention COVID, and to not mention that, I declared my state, there's no emergency here, while every hospital is jam-packed. I don't want to hear nothing else you have to say.
So in fairness, he did mention COVID. However, he very much treated the pandemic as if it was in the past tense.
Well,
and it was interesting to hear the Democratic...
He canceled it.
Right.
He canceled it in December. The overflowing hospitals just didn't get the memo.
Well, no, you're exactly right. And this is where his big fault is, because this week the Pandemic Task Force said it needs federal help to staff the hospitals, and the reason it needs federal help is because on December 31st, he ended the state of emergency, which would have allowed hospitals to expand bed capacity.
Because we don't have any money for it out of that $7 billion surplus.
Well, you got to remember, though, he's talking to Missouri.
Well, we're in Missouri.
These are the people who re-elected him over Nicole Galloway, despite the fact that he did nothing about COVID. People are happy with that. I mean, nobody in outstate Missouri is outraged that he's not talking about COVID.
Well, the person that's laying in the
I bet some of those people are right
2 days. He's probably not. He or she is probably not thinking that right now.
It's just like Medicaid expansion. You'd think that the people who need it the most would be for it, but they're often against it.
Ray Hartmann, I want to ask you about Sam Alton, the chief of staff for the prosecuting attorney, Wesley Bell, who, according to government watchdog, self-appointed Tom Sullivan, Mr. Alton has about 9 side hustles. He's a prosecutor in Pagedale and Veneta Park and Breckenridge Hills, in addition to getting more than $100,000 a year as the chief of staff for Mr. Wesley Bell. Do you think that the chief of staff should have enough time on the side to be prosecuting cases in all these North County communities?
I don't think that somebody that's doing private practice, that's part of established practice in that office over the years, that you call each client of that person's a side hustle. I don't think that's accurate. I think you could make a good case that someone sitting in that office shouldn't be in the private sector. In other words, on the side. I think you can make a good case, but you got to make it prospectively. In other words, the past practice under previous prosecuting attorneys has been that someone in the office can represent a city in a traffic court. I don't particularly think that's a good idea, and I don't think you should be able to, but if that's the practice, I don't think you can bring it up as some kind of scandal now. I think you can argue that it should change, and I think it's fair. And I do think I know the logical thing to say is, well, what about Sam Page? It's a very different thing because the county charter very clearly suggests that that the county executive is a full-time, or whatever they call it, position, and his I've called it a side hustle. One, I wouldn't call each patient he sees a side, say, well, he had 100 side hustles. But the point is, I'd say that that's a different situation where it was established that you don't do this, and in this case, it's a precedent that's been set before. So I don't think it should apply to Sam Alton today.
Much more troubling what Tom Sullivan wrote was that Sam Alton still has his private practice. And I like Sam Alton a lot. I think he's a very sharp fellow. But that would not be a good idea. I mean, you might argue that, yeah, you can be the night court attorney out here or over there, but if you have a private practice where people might come in and talk to you, that's a very bad idea. And I haven't talked to Sam Alton, so I don't know if Tom Sullivan's report is completely accurate or not. But
yeah, it seems like it's rife, the possibility of a conflict of interest here.
Yes.
And the prosecutor's power is so powerful that to have somebody who has the prosecutor's ear to have any side job, that makes me very uncomfortable.
I mean, I just don't see it like that. Now, for one, and not like I have been to a lot of sessions in Veneta Park, but if you ever go to one of those things, it ain't heavy lifting. If it's a real crime or something like that, it just gets referred to the county, okay? And as a private attorney or whatever, I just don't have a problem with it. I mean, it's literally like, and they're not side hustles, what we do and all that, but I mean, doing a municipal court is literally like kind of, I play softball on the, some nights of the,
Yeah, but I think what we learned through Ferguson is that while municipal court may seem small potatoes to those of us on the outside looking in, like, people's lives are changed by a $1,000 fine or by being told that, they have to pay this $40 court fee. Tony Messenger just wrote a whole book about this. I mean, these courts have huge power. It should get somebody's full-time attention. Chief of staff for the county prosecutor, that should have somebody's full-time attention.
If Veneta Park had a full-time prosecutor, there wouldn't be no Veneta Park.
I get that we can't have that.
Broke.
I mean, this goes back to we have too many municipalities.
Yeah,
well,
but,
thank you. That's clear.
Well,
but go ahead.
I disagree with you, Ray.
Right. God bless Veneta Park.
I think that Sam Page should have his side hustle because I think that the experience that he has as a surgeon is important, the experience that he brings to the county executive. And if Sam Alton, both these guys are named Sam for some reason, right. If Sam Alton can work 40 hours a week, Sam I am. If he can do that for Wesley Bell and on the side in the evenings, if he wants to moonlight, I have no problems with that.
I think it says all you need to know that somebody defending Sam Page refers to it as a side hustle. I think that's good.
All right.
But,
okay. Well, let's go to Bill McClellan. There's another issue involving money.
Sam Alton is a side. By the way, Wesley.
No, hang on. We got to get to Bill on not Sam Fitch, but Tim Fitch. I was going to say Bill Fitch, who was the coach of the Celtics and the Cavaliers. But it's Tim Fitch, county councilman, who was the chief of police for St. Louis County. As such, he's entitled to an $85,000 a year pension, but it's been denied to him by county government, and now he's suing. He wants more than $250,000 in back pay. I happen to think he is entitled to that, and I think he should be able to get his pension. What do you think, Bill?
Well, I have to confess my own side hustle. I retired from the Post-Dispatch and am now on pension, and I wish it were an $85,000 pension like Tim Fitch, but I was rehired as a part-timer to write 1 column a week. So I'm doing exactly what Tim Fitch wants to do. So I'm a little hesitant to say he's way off base.
Well, you're not A, you're not public servant. B, like Ray says, you know, like, hey, the rules are written like they are. So which you say says Sam Page can't, you know, be in his other side medical gig. But I was against this back when, you know, Bob McCullough wanted to do it, and I'm against this now. You knew this when you came back and said, I still want to be a player, okay? You knew what the rules were. And now I said, like, no, I want this and my back, you know, pay, my back pension or whatever. And it's like, no. I mean, you knew what you were signing on for when you ran for this office and when you won, and now you just have to wait to get your money until it's over.
You know, I'm sure that his county council colleagues are against him because they're trying to get a big raise, claiming that this is really full-time work. And here's Tim arguing that he should get his pension because this is part-time work. Right. So good luck.
I'm sorry, we're paying him $20,000 bucks. So I think we sort of have established at $20,000 for a county council person that it is a part. They're being paid for part-time work.
Right.
And I don't think anyone would argue that. I think McClellan's scandal is bigger myself.
I do too.
But it's not. It's technically not public. I don't know. I mean, we could talk. We don't really have time for that. But. I think he should get it. I tell you what,
I do too.
At $20,000 and I understand what you're saying, but it's not anything like a full-time job.
Right.
And I'm not in favor of treating. I think they should get a raise. I said it last week. I think they should get, you know, maybe a stair-step raise of $5,000 every year for a few years or whatever. Because I think 20 is kind of a pittance, but. Even if it were 30, where it might be, it would still be part-time.
Alvin Reid, Shama Dogan, state representative from Baldwin, as it turns out, raised more money in the fourth quarter last year in his upcoming race for county executive as a Republican than Sam Page, the incumbent. Again, the challenger raised $8,000 more than the incumbent. What's your analysis?
Well, when I read the headline, I said, like, whoa, this is big news. And then I read the amount totals, and I said, like, this is kind of news. And then the difference in the two, 8,000, was kind of like, okay, all right. But I'll give the Republican possible candidate his nod. It means that people recognize who he is, and that there are some people that are willing to jump in the fray now, even though the election is pretty far away. So I'll give him his nod. You know, all that news probably did was cause somebody to write a check for $100,000 to Sam Page. Well, you know, just.
But money begets money, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
now Shama Dogan can say, hey, I'm viable. There's other people giving me money. Line up. This really helps him. He's got an uphill battle as a Republican. Yeah. But he's now put himself as, okay, I'm the guy who can take on Sam Page. There's a lot of people who don't like Sam Page.
I agree with you, but the reason somebody's going to write that $100K check is for optics. So, like, let's not have any more headlines like this. So somebody said, all right, let's get ahead, stay ahead. You know, and but for now, good job.
And I think he can win. I actually, well, I do. I think it shows kind of some organic strength, even though these are not all little, you know, some of them are smaller and some of them are large contributions from people we've heard of. But I think he has. He was on my show this week, and he made the point that he's got better relationships with a member of the county council than Sam Page does, and I think that's fair. And if this was a referendum on ideology, I would not even consider Shama Dogan because he's a conservative Republican. I disagree with him on a lot of stuff. I think do not sleep on this guy's candidacy because he really has. I just think Sam Page has a lot of vulnerability, and I think that this news, while it may not be a huge amount of money, demonstrates that he's got some organic support. And, you know, Rick Stream didn't lose that badly. Everybody talks about what a blue county it is. Steve Steger barely beat Rick Stream in 2014.
And I voted for Rick Stream. Well, I put the whole ideology out of the way because it was anybody but.
Well,
and it's
this could happen here.
Same theory, but I don't think there will be as many me's that voted for Dogan.
I wouldn't.
as
All
they
I'm saying
were.
is, I think it's going to be a very competitive race.
Right. The West County elite
And I
vote,
think this
not
does
counting
win.
myself.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not switching
We
parties.
have an African-American Republican running for county executive. That doesn't happen every day.
No, but what I'm saying is, I think people aren't as pressed to vote for the Republican as they were.
You might be right.
You know what I think is ironic?
I want to ask, we only have a minute to go, and we like to say that good things happen to people who work here at 9 PBS. And Casey Nolan, who hosted the 7:30 to 8 o'clock show here for a while he was also working at 5 on Your Side, KSDK, Sarah, it was announced this week that he and Abby Lorico are getting married and moving out to Washington, D.C., where they'll be reporters. Now, how about them apples? With a minute to go, you don't see that every day, do you?
Well, I think it's a great promotion for a guy who deserves it. I don't know Abby's work as well, but Casey really has earned a good reputation as being a good political reporter in this town. Been here since 2007. You don't see too many TV reporters with that kind of longevity. It really shows in his work. I think we're going to miss him.
She's an award-winning podcaster who's had a lot of success in her few years here in St. Louis. I think she's a native St. Louisan, so we wish them the best, and we like to think that their connections with us, Ray, or at least Casey's, was instrumental in his success.
I'd say it was best an obstacle. No, but I think it's a great story. The fact that they're getting married, they work, I just think it's a great story. And he's a great guy. I don't know his bride as well, but he is. They're not. I think it's a really nice story.
Good reporter.
Gotta
like
wrap
being
it
on
up
the show.
as we
I was
go.
on the show a few times, and I like it. He's a nice guy.
Absolutely. Let's go to the mailbag and see what people had to say about last week's program. We start with Brian Hewing of Ellisville, who wrote, if a St. Louis County resident like me has to pay the earnings tax, does that mean we get to have a say in how it's spent? Otherwise, it's taxation without representation, which would make the earnings tax unconstitutional. Thank you, Mr. Hewing. We also heard from Umar Lee, who tweeted, regarding the Afghan refugees, my only concern is that they be placed in safe and affordable housing with easy access to jobs and public transportation. Thank you, Mr. Lee. You can write us, care of 9 PBS, 3655 Olive Street, St. Louis, 63108. Don't forget those emails, donnybrook@9pbs.org, and those tweets, hashtag DonnybrookSTL. And you can follow us for our podcasts on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and TuneIn. Thanks so much to Sarah Fenske for joining us, sitting in for Wendy Weiss. In just a moment, we're going to talk to Jerry Schlichter about Afghan refugees and other matters he's involved with. Don't miss this one. That's on Next Up. Ray and I will be right back.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.